folks who are looking for seats, here's some really bad news. There are a bunch of seats up in front. So feel free to come on up and join things up here.
Thank you.
So I bring you greetings on behalf of Ron's family, Elaine, Benjamin, Brother Bob, their families. It's good to have all of you here. My name is Phil Haslanger. I started working with Ron at the Cap Times in 1973, and remarkably, we stayed friends. So it's a real honor to be able to gather folks together for this service. I lead a double life. In addition to being a journalist, I'm also a United Church of Christ minister, so I've done this sort of thing before. The music some of you were able to hear as you were settling in were two pieces he selected for the memorial service. The piece will hear at the end, an organ toccata, is another piece he chose. I think Ron, in his grandest thoughts, might have been envisioning a live chorus, instruments, and organ. But this service is simpler than that. Let me tell you, you might not think of Ron as a particularly churchy person, and if you look at the program, this service might seem kind of churchy, with those three very traditional hymns we'll be singing. So let me tell you a little bit about that side of Ron that most people probably didn't know. There was a deep spirituality in Ron, shaped by his growing up, given some depth by his studies, nurtured by his love for music and for nature. He once told Elaine, if you listen to music and look at nature, there's no doubt there is a supreme being. He would be one of those people we call spiritual, but not religious. Didn't hang out at churches a lot. But he grew up near one. His mother, Eleanor, had an adopted father who was a congregational missionary in Japan. He sang in church choirs as a teen. His master thesis at Tufts was on the 1968 adoption of liberation theology as social policy in Latin America. When he got involved in gay liberation in Madison, they hung out a lot at St. Francis House, the Episcopal Student Center on campus. So even though he and Elaine never really belonged to a church here, it was not uncommon for them to go to church where there was good music, or to the Welsh hymn sings in the area. And with choral groups, he sang the Messiah and Requiems, and he took a lot of nurturing out of those experiences. So that's sort of the context for why there are a couple of hymns. He wanted some of that reflected in our gathering today. The hymns we'll be singing are hymns he picked out for us today. Now when folks gather for an occasion like this, we come from many different religious and spiritual backgrounds, or perhaps no particular religious connection at all. So please feel free to join in this in whatever way you're most comfortable with. If it's listening, that's great. If it's singing, we'd love to have a lot of voices involved. And then there'll only be a few voices speaking here, but there are a lot of stories about Ron that won't get shared here, but you might want to share with each other afterwards. There's treats. We can linger here for a while, but you may want to grab a bunch of folks. There are a lot of really good restaurants in this area. So get a gang and go to a restaurant and tell more stories about Ron. There are people here from a lot of different circles of life in which Ron moved. So if you're willing and able, would you either stand or wave when I mention those groups? And some of you may want to do this more than once, because you're in many groups. But first of all, Ron's family. Could you stand or raise your hands? Family, yeah. Good to have all of you here. When I was coming in, Stuart Levitan said, was the journalist here, we could put out a hell of a newspaper tonight. All the people who know Ron from journalism stand up, or raise your hands. Ron was also involved in the world of politics. People who knew Ron from the political world. Wave your hands, stand up. People who got to know Ron in the gay liberation movement, or over the years has worked with gay liberation, AIDS, those sorts of things. Frank Lloyd Wright people. He did spend a lot of time working around Frank Lloyd Wright, so we have folks from that part of the universe here as well. And if you haven't raised your hand or stood up yet, you're a friend, so raise your hand or stand up. All of us can do that. After Ron died, John Nichols of the Cap Times and the Nation wrote a beautiful column about Ron, and he opened it with some words from Walt Whitman, words that were especially precious to Ron. And John wrote, "I never knew anyone who so well and truly embraced the prospect Whitman offered as Ron McCrea." So Ron's stepson, Benjamin, will read Walt Whitman's words.
This is from the epigraph to Leaves of Grass. "Come," said my soul, "such verses for my body let us write, for we are one. That should I after return, or long, long hence in other spheres, there to some group of mates, the chance resuming, telling earth's soil, trees, winds, tumultuous waves, ever with pleased smile I may keep on, ever and ever yet the verses owning, as first I, here and now, signing for soul and body, set them my name." Walt Whitman.
Thanks, Benjamin. Our pianist today is Patrick Christians, who's the choir director at Lake Edge Lutheran Church on Monona Drive, just down the road. He also happens to be the husband of Cap Times arts and culture reporter Lindsay Christians, which seemed like a nice connection to have in these circles that Ron inhabited. And the piano he's playing on is a gift from Jack Lucier, another Cap Times connection. So, Patrick, would you lead us into God of our Fathers, whose almighty hand, the words are in your program. Writing, speaking about Frank Lloyd Wright, spending time with Elaine, but he never took his eye off the Capitol. And he wondered if maybe he could still help make things a little better there. State Rep Diane Hesselbein was wise enough to hire Ron on her staff, and she will read us an account of Ron's life.
Ron McCrea was a longtime resident of Madison. He was a prominent newspaper writer and editor, a lecturer and published authority on Frank Lloyd Wright, and a political activist, rallying to causes that included organized labor, gay rights, and the administration of Governor Anthony S. Earl. He was known for his love of music, wit, and wordplay. For the past 26 years, he was married to Elaine DeSchmidt, his partner, passion, and love. She survives him. He died of cancer at a Grace Hospice on December 14, 2019. He was 76. Ron was born in Saginaw, Michigan on January 30th, 1943 to Eleanor Lombard McCrea, a teacher and dance instructor, and Malcolm R. McCrea, a newspaper reporter. He became the third generation of journalists in his family, following in the steps of his father and grandfather. Ron worked at the Boston Globe, Washington Post, Washington Star, New York Newsday, and San Jose Mercury News, in addition to 2 stints at the Capital Times from 1970 to 1977 and from 1995 to 2008. He was the editor of the Press Connection in Madison from 1977 to 1980, a paper that emerged from the newspaper strike that he helped lead. As an editor on the copy desk at Newsday, he was involved with the stories that won Pulitzer Prizes in 1992 and 1993. He was a 1961 graduate of Arthur Hill High School and editor of the Arthur Hill News. He graduated in 1965 from Albion College with a BA in political science, where he sang in the college choir and edited the weekly Played. He took graduate courses at the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. Then, in 1969, earned an MA from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He won an Alicia Patterson National Reporting Fellowship in 1975. In 1979, he was named Wisconsin Civil Libertarian of the Year by the Wisconsin Civil Liberties Union Foundation for challenging government secrecy around the hydrogen bomb with a story that ran in the Press Connection. He served as Communications Director for Governor Anthony Earl from 1983 to 1987, then was on the staff of Mayor Joe Sensenbrenner's re-election campaign in 1989. In between those 2 jobs, he was a writer in residence at the Wisconsin Academy of Arts and Letters. In recent years, he worked as an aide to me. His appreciation of music led him to play 5 instruments and sing in choirs for a good share of his life. His appreciation of architecture and a good story informed his study of the life of Frank Lloyd Wright. His 2012 book, Building Taliesin, Frank Lloyd Wright, Poem of Love and Loss, was published by the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. He was working on another book at the time of his death about the women who helped advance Wright's career. Survivors, in addition to Elaine, include a brother, Robert McCrea, and his wife, Christine of Marquette, Michigan, a half-brother, Errol Bellman of Gardnerville, Nevada, and a stepson, Benjamin DeSchmidt, and his partner, Angie Cook of Kenosha, Wisconsin. Ron loved Wisconsin, and Wisconsin loved Ron. It is my honor to present this Wisconsin state flag to his family in recognition of his contribution and service to the citizens of our great state. The flag was flown over the Capitol today in his honor and memory.
Thanks, Diane. Those of you who are stuck standing in back, you have an option. There are seats near the front. And as we're singing the next hymn, feel free to come on up and claim some of those seats or enjoy standing. So another hymn selected by Ron, Abide With Me. It was April of 1997, and women were emerging into leadership positions in Madison. The head of the Madison Area Technical College, the superintendent of Madison schools, the Madison Fire Chief were all women. And on election day, the voters chose Sue Bauman as the city's first female mayor and Kathy Falk as the first female county executive. Ron was working on the headline for the Capital Times the next day. Some of you know where this is going. And what happened, I think, reflected some of the themes that defined Ron's life. Dame County, the headline read. Ron knew it was not exactly a traditional headline, so he checked with editor Dave Zwiefel, who gave it the green light, and then the blowback started. Disrespectful of women, not serious enough, outdated word, and so on. Ron worried about how the subjects of the headline might react. Kathy Falk told of the call she received from Ron the next day to see if the headline had offended her. She remembered telling him she thought the headline was quite cool and how much she appreciated his phone call. This was all quintessential Ron. It reflected his spirit of boldness, creativity, joyfulness, and compassion. And while other stories also reflect his courage, there's a bit of that in this as well. But let's start with his spirit of boldness. Just before Ron arrived in Madison in the summer of 1970, he had come out as gay. So he immediately got involved with the gay liberation movement here. He also got a job as a copy editor at the Cap Times in December of 1970. The following May, he wrote a series of stories for the paper about liberation movements in Madison. Women's liberation, men's liberation, gay liberation. He was not yet out to his colleagues at the paper, but his activism in the community was growing. As historian Dick Wagner wrote in the first volume of his History of Gays in Wisconsin, Ron was among the first to record the stories of gay men in Madison, in Wisconsin. There were risks involved in being a gay activist in the early 1970s, but Ron's spirit of boldness overcame any fears he may have had. However, there were still his colleagues at work. They did not know about his sexuality. His two worlds merged in May of 1972 when he was part of a panel of gay activists speaking to the monthly meeting of the Madison Press Club. Dave Zwiefel recalls that Cedric Parker, then the paper's front page editor, was appalled when he saw Ron on the panel. You mean I'm sitting next to a homosexual? But Ron had told the paper's executive editor, Elliot Marinus, about his activities before the panel, and afterwards, Elliot told him, don't ever hesitate to associate yourselves with the Cap Times when you do these panels. Ron deeply appreciated that. It did not, however, keep him from taking bold stands against the newspaper he worked for. In June of 1973, the first issue of the Madison Journalism Review appeared, with Ron as the president of the 7-member board of editors. He wrote this: people in Madison depend on their information as vitally as they depend on their cars, but nobody's checking the brakes or steering mechanisms of the press. It's time someone did. And that initial issue included a sharp critique of the Cap Times coverage of a police raid on a house on Broome Street written by some new reporter at the paper named Haslanger. Even bolder, though, was Ron's role as at the Newspaper Guild and 4 other unions as we all went on strike against Madison newspapers and the 2 newspapers that it published. He had just been named spokesman for the strikers, and we were trying to launch a strike newspaper. Bill Christopherson from the State Journal and I were the initial co-editors trying to come up with a name, and I ran into Ron after a meeting. I said, I hear you're the voice of the strike. And he said, no, I'm just the press connection. We had a name. And he would become the editor and guiding light of that paper for the next 2.5 years. Sometimes Ron paid a price for his boldness. After the strike was over and the press connection came to an end, Ron got a job at the Washington Post. But it did not last long. Ben Bradley, the legendary editor, personally blocked his permanent hiring there after learning that Ron was gay and had been a strike editor. two of what Ron called Bradley's bugaboos. Ron's spirit was clearly reinforced by his spirit of courage, and there were two moments of that in the life of the Press Connection when that courage came to the fore. One came in 1979 when the Press Connection published that special issue containing a letter from a computer programmer in California explaining in detail how a hydrogen bomb worked. The federal government was in court trying to keep the Progressive magazine from publishing something similar, and the Press Connection publication made that case moot and put Ron in the crosshairs of the feds. 40 years later, speaking from the audience last September during a panel at Cap Times Idea Fest, Ron called the whole episode the most traumatic experience I have ever had. He cited the hate mails, the hate calls, the death threats. He knew he was risking many years of prison time if the feds came down on him and the paper. And he talked candidly then about his regrets over the publication. He never had a reasonable chance of convincing the public that this was a responsible act by the press, he said. Always candid, always self-reflective. Here's another moment that reflected Ron's courage and his loyalty to those